This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the UK team behind the artisan Beta Cut pruning products. Still largely undiscovered by the UK market, but recently discovered by Selfridges in May of this year, they're now stocked there. The Beta Cut brand is the sign of excellent craftsmanship, using traditional hot drop forging methods, with the handmade cutting tools made in Erba, Italy, near the banks of Lake Como. Beta Cut has been a leader in providing steel cutting blades since 1955, and offers gardeners handcrafted products for those seeking that unique and traditional alternative. They're fabulous as a gift too. See the pruner and sharpening stone box set in the link in the show notes. As a special offer for listeners, Beta Cut is offering a special 20% off all orders placed via the website throughout August 2021. Simply visit the link in the show notes to the shop and enter the code ROOTS20, all uppercase, at the checkout. So this episode, I'm speaking to permaculture designer, teacher and author Anna Locke. Anna is my favourite type of gardener in that she walks the walk and has a wealth of experience in growing edible plants. She's recently published a book called The Forager's Garden, and in the interview, we talk about how to create an easy to look after yet productive space. First up, Anna explains how she became involved in permaculture.
It was actually quite a long journey in that I first encountered it maybe when I was like 25, and I attended an intro in Crouch End with Alpi Torgut. I'd just sort of been knocking around and heard all about it. There was a big vibe about the Margaret Macmillan Forest Garden at the time because they were just designing it and setting it up. But I trying to kind of sift back into my memories. I think I was actually pregnant. I didn't go on to do the whole course, but I actually did gardening about 3 years later. And it wasn't until I got more into gardening, because I've had about 3 career threads. So when I was working in schools doing sort of holistic, alternative educational and mentoring with kids, there were so many little pots of money and funding and community gardening. It was around about the time of the Olympics, was really getting lots of attention and gaining popularity. So at that point, I became a community gardener in North London and trained further in permaculture. I mean, to me, it just made sense. It's a progression of all 3 of my careers have been really sort of holistic. So one was like holistic education, one was holistic health, and then with the gardening, it's the same philosophy, isn't it? The things you put into your body, the things you put into the soil, to me, they're all related. So permaculture really just makes a lot of sense in terms of being sustainable and holistic.
Yeah, so where are you based now, and do you have a garden that you work out of, or do you have your own place?
So now, I'm based in Hastings. I've got my own kind of muse garden, which is like a forager's garden where I live. I also do community gardening here. So I'm setting up gardens and sort of raising awareness about things like guild planting and plants for pollinators and meadow verges. But also because of downsizing from London and being so passionate about permaculture, I've got a small holding. So a lot of my attention is there at the moment, developing orchards and foragers' gardens and restoring meadows and things.
You mentioned, obviously, the title of your book is The Forager's Garden. Perhaps you could just explain what one of those is.
Yeah, so it is an ode to the forest garden because that is, sort of, if you like, my training and the interest that I had in developing sort of longer-term edible gardens rather than a sort of conventional vegetable patch, was developing loads of those. And then I teach workshops in Hastings and just realised that people didn't really get it, because when you say a forest garden, in order to truly understand what that means, you have to know the ideas behind it. So you have to know that it's based on creating a stable succession forest structure, which is kind of it's quite a hard thing to grasp.
Yeah, it's a difficult term, isn't it? I think it does sometimes confuse people.
So, yeah, forest gardening is confusing. Obviously, if you're kind of, in inverted commas, in the know and you've kind of grasped that kind of ecological succession thing about a stable forest, then it's much more appealing. But to most people, you know, the thing you want it to do what it says on the tin, and what these gardens do is create food that you go out, and it's more naturalized kind of food planting, longer term planting, and it's very kind of seasonal. So there's this relationship in your garden exactly as if you were foraging in nature, because that's what you're kind of recreating. So yeah, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but the whole purpose of changing the terminology was so that it would appeal to people who hadn't heard about permaculture, you know, and that it would be immediately kind of like, yeah, I want one of those in my garden, kind of things. And hopefully that is much sort of more ready for people to grasp and get enthusiastic about.
Yeah, it's a very attractive term. I think that it does exactly what what you set out for it to do. As someone who manages a small holding, I'm guessing that you know kind of how things can get quickly out of hand. But one of the things that I did like about your book is that you say that the garden is kind of a project to dip into and out of as time, money and opportunity comes along. So I think maybe some people are a little bit scared to let things go and develop things, gradually. Can it really be that easy, and can it be that little work?
I mean, I've been gardening for a really long time, and the reason why I do it is because it is. When you're doing other people's gardens and sort of community projects involving sort of grafting in gardens and things, when I'm at home, I want my beautiful garden, and I want to be growing food, but sometimes I can do more and sometimes I can do less. So, it is, because the way you develop it is seasonal. So you're waiting for the right season to add certain plants. So in that sense, already how you're setting one up is spread out over time. And I mean, the most important thing is to get your tree layers in and your shrub layers in, and then everything else is really a matter of like adding layers and filling up gaps. And should you stumble across a glut of plants somewhere in your community, then you'll just clear a spot and add things as and when. So I mean, I've got loads of food right now, and I've virtually not been out there. I think I've probably done in my home garden about 2 or 3 sessions this year, but I've literally got so much fruit just waiting to turn now that I know that, I'm going to be hard pushed to actually go out and gather that all and preserve it in time. So yeah, it's a slow and kind of low little work garden.
Sounds ideal. You mentioned earlier guild planting. Can you explain what that is?
Okay, so guild planting it's on the one hand, it's like a conceptual model. And on the other hand, it's a really amazing, beautiful, practical application in a garden. And so on the one hand, it's like seeing plants differently for their roles in the ecosystem. So it's quite nice when you do a permaculture guild, because when you're doing a forager's garden, you want most things to be edible, but it's when you apply the sort of guild concept that you can sneak in those flowers just because they're beautiful, but also because they're fulfilling some kind of role in the guild. What I noticed as well with the roles is that they add up to the equivalent of growing your own pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. So another reason why the guild is so important is because it lends itself to organic farming and not using chemicals. So, and the way it does that, so if we look at the kind of the pest situation, we've got pollinator attractors. So this is what most people are into with companion planting, attracting good pollinators to their potential crops or fruit or yields of beans or whatever it might be. And then on the other hand, the insect repellent plants. So they're two kind of categories that they work holistically. They're not antagonistic, like you've got more of one and less of the other or whatever. But effectively, they're like growing your own pesticides. And then you've got things like ground cover. So that's effectively like weed excluders, like a herbicide. So if you've got your ground cover right, you work less. And for example, the other category is a nitrogen fixer. So if you had a nitrogen fixing ground cover, you're also fertilizing the ground and excluding weeds and also sort of reducing your work. And then on the fertilizer front, you've got the dynamic accumulators, which are like those deep tap-rooted plants that when you chop and drop their leaves, you've effectively got nutrients in those leaves that you mulch around plants. So there's 5. The other one is the umbellifer, which is a pollinator attractor as well. But like, you know, talk to any ecologist and umbellifers just seem to be sort of bug magnets. And, you know, they are really, really pretty and useful in a garden. So, yeah, it's kind of an idealistic concept, but it's also very practical and it's also really beautiful. So, like, I never plant a tree without planting gills under it now. It would seem naked without it all.
I mean, yes, it's a brilliant concept. The other thing that you spoke about in your book, which I thought was a really a good policy, is your keep it for now policy. But what is the theory behind that? So
keep it for now is, it's on one hand, when you move into a garden, it's very tempting just to sort of go in there, tear things out, create yourself a blank canvas, you know, pull out kind of trees or shrubs or whatever. But quite often, when you do that, you might regret it, you know. So there's that thing of getting to know your garden, finding out what these plants are before you make that decision to take them out, and also getting to know your plants, because once you start to see plants in different ways, you know, you might take out, for example, an azalea because you want an edible garden, but actually that's an early spring pollinator attractor, for example. So, you know, it's just about really understanding your garden's conditions. And also when you leave the plants in and you watch the plants, they're often indicating what conditions you have. You know, because certain plants will thrive in certain conditions, so it's good just to observe. But then the other theory behind it really is about the integrity of the soil, because as you know, as soon as you pull out plants and leave bare soil, you lose all that moisture, you disturb all the kind of weeds. A lot of them, when you disturb soil, are kind of, you know, brambles and docks and sort of harder to manage weeds. And yeah, I just like to sort of keep things there until I've got something to replace them. Like this afternoon, for example, I've just been out in the garden, and it's that time of year where like the herb Robert's gone really mad, and I had some plants that I'd grown from seed. So the herb Robert is really easy to pull out. So it's much easier for me to pull that out and replace it with like the cornflowers that I were putting in, rather than if I'd pulled all of that herb Robert out in spring and that ground was really baked and dry or had other like harder to manage weeds. Because you get to know the plants, and it's like, I know that herb Robert's good to keep because it's an easy thing to manage when I need to remove it. So it's just, you know, it's just about that thing about the balance of plants and just keeping the integrity of your garden until you're really ready to do things.
Yeah, it does. It's the best way to do it, I think. But again, it takes a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of faith that you're not going to, you know, things aren't going to run completely away from you. But talking about sort of mixing the wild with the productive, I was really interested in your grafting fruit trees onto wild hawthorns and blackthorns. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that was quite an interesting challenge. And the reason why we did that was because our conditions in this particular garden were really acidic. So it is a really interesting thing to do, but I just wanted to say that it's only pertinent if you've got acidic ground or marginal ground that you want to extend into sort of growing fruits. But that's because the blackthorn and the hawthorn like the acid conditions, and so therefore will support the fruit. But there is that quote, isn't there, which I was really sort of grateful and amazed to stumble across, by Abraham Cowley, and he says, "He does the savage hawthorn teach to bear the medlar and the pear. He bids the rustic plum to rear a noble trunk and be a peach." And that's from like maybe 400 years ago. And it was Martin Crawford who sort of suggested to graft onto the hawthorn. And it was really nice to stumble across that quote, because, people have been trying to garden in hard to manage conditions for a long, long time, obviously. And it's through that kind of human amazingness that we invent these things and we can extend our reach. It's interesting. And we have grafts in the garden, hornthurst, that still at the bottom have hawthorn leaves that I have to keep pruning off, and then at the top is a quince tree.
Yeah, very cool thing to do. And talking about ground that's maybe not the easiest to cultivate, again, you talk about Hugelkultur beds. Is that why you might use one, for example, in that kind of situation?
Well, there's I suppose the Hugelkultur, in the end, because I've done a few like in allotments and in gardens and over there in Hornthurst, like big 5-meter ones. In the end, my overall conclusion with the Hugelkultur, my number one selling point for it is that it just tidies up your garden. It's just like, because every allotment comes with loads of rotting wood in some corner of it, or, a fence that's kind of rotten down at the back of the garden. And all of these things are really heavy to move. In the Hornthurst garden, we had huge branches, and it's like, what do we do with them? We don't want to burn them. How can we use them? So we just tidied up the garden, heaved them all into a big pile. In Hornthurst, we had diggers, and we dug a sort of trench behind them and put soil on top of them. So on one hand, it's really good for tidying up the garden. On the other hand, the actual theory behind it is that you have loads of organic matter that slowly rots down and releases nutrients over time to your plants. And then another one really good outcome is it changes the landscape of your garden, so it makes, it gives you different levels to sort of play around with in your design. So I've got a tree on my small holding that is a beech tree, and the branches come down really low. So I'm making a Hugelkultur that will meet the bottom of those branches, and therefore when you sit by the tree, you feel totally enclosed. So, it's like a 3-dimensional thing that you can use in your... Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, to use it as a kind of design tool and to sculpt the landscape. That's genius.
Like even, like if you did Hugelkulturs in a community setting that then became turf seating. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you can be quite playful with all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I feel inspired. I feel like I should go and put some in. And it's kind of talking about terminology as well. You did mention something called an Ollas. I wondered if you could just maybe briefly touch on what that is.
Yeah, that was a nice part of the Hornthurst project. I actually got told about Ollas by this friend of mine, Simon Moore, who we worked with. We worked together in North London, and he had told me about putting 2 flower pots together. And when I looked into it, it's more like an ancient Greek or Roman. I forgot, those the things that you'd put wine in. So it's kind of like a rounded vase, if you like, and it's quite, it can be quite sizable, like maybe holding 2 liters of water. And Ollas actually just means pot. and you sink it next to your key plants. So we've got 10 Ollas in Hornshurst in this bit that I call the apple strip. So we've got a big Olla planted, dug in, and we dug it in first and planted the trees next to it, next to each fruit tree. And it's a bit like, like feeding on demand. It's a porous pot, so it holds water, but it's not glazed, and it's not fired at such a high temperature that it's like 100% watertight. So it seeps the water into the ground. And the theory is that the plants almost grow around the pot and draw the water when they need it.
I was going to say it's a little bit, it's just ingenious, and it's so simple. And I'd never heard of one. No, I'd never heard of it.
Because now when you work with these things for a while, it sort of becomes part of the vocabulary, and then you just think, it's a really beautiful thing. When you look into it, it's really ancient, like probably Egyptians or, really early water management, because, when you see aqueducts and aquifers that like the Romans and the Greeks and kind of, even before that have created, they knew so much about irrigation, and we just have to look to them to sort of learn it, really. Yeah,
definitely.
It's really good. I mean, it is designed, probably I'd put a caveat that, it's for those kind of more temperate climates that have real challenges in sort of, drought and then heavy rain, and that they don't freeze. So, I mean, ours in Hornshurst, they've been in there for 5 years. And you just have to sort of make sure that there's not too much water in it during the winter so that they don't freeze and crack. Even if they do, it doesn't matter, because what you want is for the water to be released, but slowly.
Yeah, so they'd still work it, to a degree anyway. So, genius, absolutely genius. We all need to be a bit more mindful about water, don't we, going forward, because it's not a given.
No, I mean, just look at the last few weeks. It's just been crazy. 1 minute, it's like really feeling distress of all that heat and the dryness, and I was just looking at all the fruit trees, just going, oh my God, they all need watering. And then the next minute, it's like floods, and I've got IBC tanks that I'm just like sort of kicking myself because they're all overflowing, because I don't have extra IBC tanks to fill at the moment, and I'm just thinking I've just wasted 1,000 litres of water. It's going to get a lot worse, I think.
Yeah. I think the more tips we know like that you've got in the book, the better, because like you say, things aren't going to get much better, I don't think, with the climate. So I was thinking about if someone had, inherited a garden, or they were starting it from scratch, and maybe it was like a typical back garden with a lawn and some borders. What would be your best advice for somebody in that situation?
Well, in that situation, I would say move in, map it, draw just a really simple map of your garden, and do wait a year if you can. I know it's really hard. You have to sit on your hands and go, oh, I really want to do something, but it really does pay to wait and see your garden in all seasons. So, so that you get a sense of where the light is and the dry and the wind and all the rest of it, because there's no point in putting in plants into places where they won't survive. So I think, and often when you move house and you get a new garden, there's so much to do in the house. So it's almost a good thing to tell yourself, okay, I'm just observing the garden right now. And then next year I'll start to sort of design it and do stuff. So, it's that whole thing of getting to know your plants, identifying all the plants that come up in different seasons, understanding what your trees are, seeing what fruits you've got. And then, you go through that process, but you're also asking yourself questions like, well, if I'm going to grow a tree, what tree do I want? Because what fruits do I want, and what do I want to make from that tree? So it's really about getting the garden that you need, that's going to meet your needs, whatever they happen to be. And you can just really, obviously I do permaculture. I think designing is really important. and spending 80% of the time thinking about what you're doing. You'll still make mistakes, but if you spend a lot of time thinking about what you're doing, you will suddenly know when to make a change or dig something out and replace it with something else. So I would just say, keep what you have, observe it, make your plans, dream about it, think about what you want to eat, what you want to cook or make, and then sort of make yourself a little plan and just add things each season in that situation.
Kind of going to the other end of the extreme, because I was thinking a lot of people might want to build a forager's garden on an allotment, and some people inherit allotments that are just completely overgrown and they don't know where to start. Maybe have you got one good tip for someone in that situation?
Well, I mean, it's the same philosophy, but a slightly different approach. So again, rather than spend a hell of a lot of energy clearing, to think you have to have a blank canvas, I would say, start small, do small areas at a time, prioritize. I've had a lot of allotments and a lot of letters from allotment officers. And sort of, what I've learned is you do the front of your allotment first so it looks good. And also get your trees in. And again, it's like sometimes you've got to see your plants as your friend. So sometimes, for example, on my small holding, which is not dissimilar to inheriting an old allotment, got so many brambles, but actually, I keep them around the fruit trees because it helps protect them from deer and rabbits. And so, it's don't jump straight in, but definitely have a plan and just do small bits at a time, and get your trees in first if you can, or the kind of the longer term plants like shrubs. And just design, just spend a lot of time designing your allotment, and then you'll work smart, not hard.
Yeah, that is what it's all about. Well, it is in my book anyway. I'm a lazy gardener. The other thing that kind of struck me reading your book is a lot of people do come to this without kind of a huge encyclopedic knowledge of edible plants. And I wondered if you used a website or a book, or whether you had a go-to person if you wanted to ID the plants that you might be thinking of eating.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, it's just amazing, isn't it? Not that I'm sort of suggesting that people use things like Facebook, but that kind of the social media thing where you're having conversations with other people, fellow gardeners. We've got the Dig Deep gardening group here in Hastings, and it's just always got people asking what plants are, and there's always someone in the group who can identify. And if not, it sparks off a really good conversation. So I think that's a fun way to sort of get to know your plants and get to know people around you that know their plants and, are into plants. I'm sort of old school. I grew up with like proper British flora, like the concise British flora, and they're kind of books that are set out with beautiful drawings, botanical drawings in plates. And what you do is you go through and sort of find what your plant looks like, and then you narrow it down by reading at the back. But I mean, that I'm just describing that, and that does sound really old school. There's all kinds of apps. I have to admit, I know there's apps where you can take pictures of plants and things, but I don't use that personally. Recently, I've just sort of a colleague at work, so I've got a local ecologist who's, when you've got like plants that you think it might be one thing or the other, and you just need to really know. So it's always good to refer to a professional, and it may not be that expensive just to get, if you've got particularly a bigger project, get an ecologist in, and they can do a little survey for you.
Thank you to Anna for taking part in the interview. I learned so much from speaking to her, and I hope you've been inspired to create your own forager's garden. Thanks to you for listening, and to Beta Cut for sponsoring this episode. Dr. Ian Bedford is up next, talking about a master of disguise.
With spring now underway, increasingly more plants within our gardens will be bursting into life, and with an abundance of fresh tender leaves and nectar-rich flowers, a vast and diverse array of invertebrates are being motivated into starting their annual life cycles. life cycles that will be fraught with danger as the seasonal battles play out between predators and prey. A scenario that, over the past 400 million years, has honed and perfected stealth and weaponry for both defence and assault. And by natural selection, has produced some amazing ways for species to survive within the bug world, many of which can be seen in action whenever we're out in our gardens. One of these is the cunning yet highly effective system that crab spiders have evolved to catch nectar-feeding insects, such as butterflies and bees. Crab spiders are common in Britain, particularly in gardens where lots of flowers are grown, and they're easily recognised by their crab-like shape and their ability to walk backwards and sideways. Their front four legs are also longer and stronger than the rear four, almost resembling the pincers of a crab. Unlike most other garden spiders though, crab spiders don't spin webs, but stay motionless, on or within a flower, holding their front legs wide open, waiting to catch their prey as it lands to feed. But bees and butterflies have relatively good eyesight, so why don't they see the spiders and avoid getting caught on the flowers? Well, the crab spiders are also masters of camouflage, choosing only the flowers that match their own body colours, of white, green or pale yellow. Also, with lightning speed, they snap their legs shut around their victim as it lands on the flower and inject a fast-acting venom through long, slender fangs. Within seconds, the victim is paralysed, unable to move, but appearing perfectly normal sitting on the flower, whilst underneath, the spider surreptitiously sucks out its victim's internal juices. Despite their predatory prowess, the crab spiders are not an aggressive spider and are no threat to us. But for the arachnophobes amongst us, it might be worth taking a closer look before picking flowers from the garden.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.